Greetings, Nashi and friends of Macedonia. Because I'm getting so bored with myself, I want the rest of the band to be involved in the conversation today. And the rest of the Cheka is Itso Avramov,
Dobro.
Vangel Paterov, Organ Andreevsky, and I'm your erstwhile host, Shiva Merendez. So today we're just going to chat about the necessity for activity, to do stuff, rather than just talk. Now, folks, Chris is on the left, Vangel and Ordan. Folks, we spoke earlier about the defunding, the virtual defunding of the Archaeological Institute at Kirille Method University. This is very important. Ordan, you mentioned that there wasn't much money going towards Macedonian archaeology.
The sad reality is this that since 2017, the amount of money that's been allocated for archaeology research and publication um, has been really very, very disappointing. Like in the last 5 years, less than 4,000 euros have been allocated. I mean, you can calculate this like $500 or $600 to support the archaeology work of distinguished archaeologists in Macedonia. These people have got PhDs that published in top tier journals around the world. They go to conferences in Italy around the world. Yet in Macedonia, they are humiliated and starved of resources. Right? So these people
They're on a shoestring,
they
literally.
operate on a shoestring
If a
budget,
shoestring.
and professors like have to dip in from their own meager salaries to run programs to drive, as we know, petrol in Macedonia is diesel. Everything is very expensive. So it's very difficult, extremely difficult, and unsustainable. The situation is in Macedonia when it comes to archaeology research on the one hand, and B, because of this toxic and illegal PRISPA agreement, the Macedonian sort of museums and the Macedonian state has been captured by external forces to stop, to deny that we are Macedonians, that our culture is linked to the antiquity, that we are basically some North Macedonians created in 2018 by Isaiah and Tsipras, right? And that we've got no connection to our past. And I was reading a book about Australian history, and this reminded me this is the same thing that happened to the Aborigines who were denied their right to have a history, a culture, a civilization. So this is really sad that it's happening in the 21st century by the US, by the European Union, by neo-fascists. This is the conclusion that I'm reaching.
So, if I can ask you guys, is knowing your history important? Like, let's say on a personal level, is knowing who you are, and is that important to a human being, or is it just a waste of time? What do you reckon, Chris?
Well, growing up, the stories of Megas Alexandros, my father, who was educated in Greek school, called him that.
Yep,
Even though we were speaking Macedonian,
yep.
we still used those words. It's quite important to me to give me an identity as a Macedonian living in Australia, born in Australia, an Australian Greek Macedonian,
Yeah.
all three adjectives chucked in together.
Yeah.
But the archaeology gives us even longer time frames than that. It
Then
can
just the
go back
ancients, yeah.
to. I went back to Florina for some tourism
How do we
a few
call it
years
in
ago.
Macedonia?
Leri.
Really.
Sorry, Chris, but
Yeah. Because разберва
да не разбереш цел свет.
Така. Не зборува английски, да те разбере цел свет.
Да.
Толкова. So the museum there had done some digging around the villages around Ledin, and they'd found New Stone Age, 6000 BC, evidence of occupation 6000 BC. Well, that's 7,000, 8,000 years ago, so it's before the border went in. That's a joke, before the border went in 8,000 years ago. To discuss whether the archaeological discoveries there were Greek or Macedonian or North Macedonian or Roman or... No, it was before
even the Indo-European people came.
It was right at the very beginning of agriculture, of humans doing agriculture.
Chris, you've done your DNA. And you have DNA back to the Neolithic like many of our Macedonians?
Look, DNA, the Y chromosome DNA, it splits off all the time. Every few thousand years there's a variation and it splits off. But from what I can see, I don't think, none of my DNA has moved into the area recently.
Right.
So my parents and grandparents came through, like the rest of them, around the Fertile Crescent, and through the Caucasus, and into that area about, the last split off was about 8,000 years ago.
Right. That's before the Macedonians. Therefore, you can't be Macedonian.
Before Alexander was there, I don't know, man.
Well, they reckon
I
that...
think I must be a caveman, Jim. What is it? Neanderthal.
Neanderthal.
Yeah, mainly Neanderthal.
Well, we probably do have some, they say, all of us.
Remember we used to tell Kathy we were cavemen?
Yeah, we were.
Yeah.
That was to terrify the civilized British.
Yeah. Look, it's important to know. I'm trying to make my children understand who I feel like I was.
Yep.
And it's up to them to decide how they feel about themselves.
Well, you know what you mentioned before, Megas Alexandros, Alexander Macedonsky. That's like one of the core issues that the Greeks claim that we can't use, and we were confronted by this a couple of days ago, Bungle and myself. And when you refer to us, the current Macedonians, you say, well, even if you came 300 or you came 400 years ago, I honestly couldn't be bothered explaining that, but I did say to him, look, most of us have a majority DNA that even predates the Macedonian era. That makes us older than Macedonia. So what other name do we have? That's the oldest name. And that's the historical name for how many centuries? Vangel, you grew up in a village.
Yes.
Where all the people thought they were Greeks. Well, not all, but many thought they were Greeks.
Well, they still do, you know. That's the unfortunate part. Because they don't want to widen their knowledge of their roots. So they keep on going. And the sad part is, it's still being, even if they are not with the homeland, they even migrated to America, Canada, Australia, wherever else. So my village, unfortunately, is one that sticks to the Greek line, and you can't deny them that the unfortunate part is that we're carrying that fear from where we had it at home in Kibbutzim.
May I ask you a question here? How many of those families, how many of the families spoke Greek at home in your village?
I would say the teacher that was living in the village, because he was a fanatic.
Right.
And he would
I'm talking about
pummel the kids.
Correct, no.
In Greek.
I'm not talking about then. I'm talking about here in Australia. How many of your village speak Greek at home?
I think hardly anybody. Nobody.
Except for the uncle's family?
Well, I don't think.
He did. He insisted. Yeah.
Okay,
Because
I don't know.
my cousin who married into that family learned.
Sorry?
My cousin who married into that family learned how to speak it. And at home, despite her father,
You know better because
despite her father being also what we say Greco-Man, or a Macedonian who thinks he's Greek is probably a better description. He too was one of them, but they didn't speak Greek at home. They spoke Macedonian. So when you're at your meetings here in Australia, what language do you speak?
Macedonian and English.
These are meetings of
The village.
committee
Yeah.
that ran the village activities
Yeah.
in Australia. And they spoke what language?
English and Macedonian.
English and Slavic Macedonian, Macedonian as we call it.
Yeah.
Not, yeah.
Well, whatever the ancient Macedonian is, there's a lot of debate. So I also. Oh, come here! Come here! Come here! Come here! Say now! I want to hear it now.
I do still there.
Bravo!
Kaya na Mali?
I don't know where the hell I was at now.
Oi, Kani?
Can somebody help me?
Right.
What was
It makes so much impact.
what were we talking about?
I don't know, but let me distract you. You used a couple of words to try to say Greco-Mani and what.
Yeah.
There is a word for them in English. You know?
What? Oh no, I didn't know.
Hellenophiles.
No, that's not. No.
the same thing?
No, a Hellenophile is a non-Greek who loves Greeks.
Yes.
If you're already a Greek, you can't love Greeks. But it's a good call, but I don't think it's appropriate.
Well, it's less derogatory than
Greco-Man, but inaccurate. And I think truth is important. And who came up with the word Greco-Man is an interesting question. It wasn't me. Was it you, Vangel?
Greco-Mani.
Yeah. Who came up with that?
I don't know.
Is it
It's an old word. It's older. It's older. It goes back to the 19th century.
Yeah.
19th century.
Before that.
Well, yes,
Before the
because
revolution.
yes, there were Bulgaro-Mani, Greco-Mani, there were Macedonisti, and so on.
Yeah.
So and then the Greco-Mani and Bulgaro-Mani and that was mainly, in my opinion, church affiliated sentiment. It wasn't anything that they felt outside the church, because outside the church they may have intermarried with one of the other families who they opposed, you know. Although churches were often, a village would have a pro one or pro other church, within the community there'd still be usually another faction. Ама кај вас во Кабесница имаше некои македонци, така не? Што се мислеа како македонци?
There's a few, but they're inactive. You know, they just follow the majority. That's all there is to it. They know that they're not Greeks, but there's the fear, the sadness that was installed in them.
So a lot of people who aren't Macedonian, and even Macedonians, don't actually know what you're talking about when you're saying about the fear. Now, let me just prelude your answer to say that when, after the conference of Versailles, the Greeks introduced a Macedonian primer, like for primary schools.
Yes.
And it was based on the language spoken by the people. Right? Am I correct about that?
Yep, I would say that as well.
Yeah. So when they introduced that book, it didn't take long for them to realize that it wasn't a good idea, because they didn't want us to be Macedonians. They wanted us to be Greek, and they went to extremes. Now you're talking about a child's experience. Tell me the experience of speaking Macedonian at school. What would happen to you?
Well, I remember what our teacher said to me. That is not a language. I spoke Macedonian. I said, make it honest with to the teacher. And they had a go at me. I was troubled. I thought, there were many questions that were unanswered for me. But the two most important men, and my mother was virtually, she didn't know any Greek. She was illiterate, but she didn't know any Greek. And she fought for everything Macedonian,
Yep.
but not in an open way. Like,
Crypto Macedonian.
and you just got to realize that the job was done when Texas changing the religion.
Yeah. Yeah. Metaxas was 24, was it? 1924 when, or 30s when Metaxas comes in?
Metaxas was in the 30s, but their whole policies of changing the names,
Yeah.
like it was an act of parliament, change everything, make it look
Yeah,
very
and the interesting and the interesting thing is that at the conference of Versailles, the Bulgarians lobbied to have their minority in newly occupied Macedonia considered Bulgarians, and the Greeks rejected it, and they said no, these people are Macedonian Slavs. Now, we're Macedonians, the Slav bit. You don't say Polish Slavs, Croatian Slavs, Russian Slavs. What's the point of that? Do you say French Germans or French Latins? Because French is a Latin language, they're Germanic people. So that's all nonsense, but that was the case. So, and that's why the ABC, the primary school book, was actually created to prove that they weren't Bulgarian. And now, ironically, now they're telling us, well, you says the Bulgari, you Bulgarians. That's one thing I like about Greece. They're very consistent for 2 minutes.
That's why we've got to dig up artifacts.
That's right.
We've got to research documentation and find what the real situation is, not the story that's been passed down.
That's right. Look, way too much propaganda has been invested by Western imperialist powers, notably the British Empire, the
French
Empire, the Tsarist,
the German,
the Germans, the Kaiser, who didn't care about Macedonian impact. They had a different agenda. They wanted to establish a state which they control with their monarchs. So this is an artificial creation imposed over the Macedonians and everyone else who was there. But this sort of denial of the indigenous people and their rights is just, shocking. But that was how imperialism operated then. But sadly, the same nonsense we can see now in US policies towards Macedonia and EU policies towards Macedonia. And these people are lying to the world that they've got democracy, human rights, and they respect nothing.
So, Chris, you want to say anything, bro?
No.
No? What about you, Vangelimu?
Well, I said, what else could I say?
So,
I could say
little children can I recap?
Huh?
Little children were bashed by school masters for speaking the only language that they knew.
Yeah.
That's Greek democratic civilization for you. Western.
I can say something.
Ah, thank you.
Because you said your mother, your mother didn't know Greek. Now that surprises me because my mother went to school. I said, what did you learn? I went for a couple of years, then I looked after the headmaster's children because their house was just adjacent to the school. So she had a little bit of education, but she could speak Greek, a little bit.
Oh yeah,
Not very
that's
well.
something, but I don't know.
Yeah, not wouldn't hold a discussion in it. We went to a pilgrimage to Mount
Athos?
and I can remember
Sveta Gora.
Sveti Gora. Sveti Gora.
Sveta. Mountain is feminine, Sveta Gora.
So we're sitting in a a cave waiting for a ferry to come to pick us up, a group of us. And there's some people there from Greece, from one of the towns, a well-known town. Well, it's from Vorden,
Yeah, right.
Edessa. I don't know why they call it Edessa, but
Because it means water in ancient Phrygian or something.
right.
Not Greek. In Greek, they've got two words for water: nero and hydro.
So it wasn't Edessa, from Edessa.
I got it.
These were agricultural workers,
Yep.
young kids in their 25, that sort of age, and they were they're speaking to each other in Greek a little bit, and we're speaking to each other in English, trying not to say.
What the hell's going on
You
here?
get into trouble on Mount Athos for speaking Macedonian.
Well, you probably do.
You're all right if you're at the Bulgarian monastery.
Yes.
But at the others, I'd sometimes get a clip over the ears and.
Because do you know why they won't let you speak Greek there? I mean Macedonian?
Right.
Because God only speaks in Greek.
Well, that's right. He wrote the Bible in Greek. Both books. No, I mean.
Except the Old Testament had already been written.
Yeah. Anyway, they noticed when we said a few Macedonian words, and then all of a sudden we started talking Macedonian. They spoke it perfectly, of course, because Edessa, Vorden, is core of Macedonia. From Thessalonica right through to from Solun right through to Ledin and more, and this is halfway. They were saying that though they'd been through their entire schooling, the compulsory schooling, they only spoke a little bit of Greek themselves.
That's incredible. Absolutely incredible.
Go back a generation, and that's why I say my mother could speak it. Go back 2 generations, my grandmother, born in 1895, she couldn't speak a word of it.
Is that on your mum's side?
On my father's
On your
side,
father's
I never
side.
knew the one on my mother's
Oh, okay.
side. Mother was very young.
Yeah.
She didn't come to. I think she was dead before I was born. Certainly. Anyway, I didn't know her. Whereas my father's side one, we were brought up with my grandfather and grandmother.
So here we go, guys. I'm going to challenge you now on my.
I was going to say this language thing is the reason why we spoke Macedonian.
Yeah.
People say, why didn't you learn Greek? And we didn't because Grandma.
Yeah, exactly.
Didn't like the Greeks at all.
Yeah.
Apart from that,
And
we
if
wouldn't have understood what we were discussing.
and
around
Chris
the table.
and Chris, why would you learn Greek here when you're already learning English?
It's not a matter of learning it, Jim. It's a matter of what was spoken in the
Living
house.
it.
What was spoken in the house. It wasn't spoken because Grandma didn't understand. And why would she? She was brought up under the Ottoman occupation.
That's right.
She was a woman.
Yeah.
She didn't do the trade in the town. She only stayed in the village.
Yep.
The village church was in Greek. Oh, the village church is in Greek. Why didn't she know Greek? Well, hang on.
Who knew Latin?
Ask many of the Catholics in Australia who were brought up in the 60s how much Latin they learned when they went to Catholic churches.
Yes, they knew Ave Maria.
And it was the same in Greece.
Well,
the language of our villages was certainly entirely in Macedonian.
Yep.
But there were some villages where large numbers of refugees came into the country.
So,
and they would be split often, and there'd be the Greek-speaking half and the Macedonian.
So may I interject here and say that Finlay, one of the Philhellenes, we fought for Greek liberty and ended up, I think, the dean, are they called deans at university or chancellor at the University of Athens? He's written a lot on the Greek Revolution. And he writes that the only place that Greek was spoken in a rural setting, i.e. in a village, was in the Svetogora area, in the Halkidiki, where the ancient Greek colonies had been. Now that opens up an incredible question. If there were mass Slavic migrations, how come they didn't take over these 3 little prongs of Halkidiki? They were able to go all the way south to Peloponnese, but not there. So it's very murky. I think it should be looked at again by academics. And why was there only Greek spoken there if that had been part of Greece since antiquity? Well, we've been there 300 years, according to one Greek guy.
Well, look,
Yeah,
some
that's
of
the propaganda.
yeah, a lot of the material that was presented by the British, some intellectuals, or they were sort of like half-baked historians or half-baked archaeologists. It was more of a propaganda of their sort of like understanding of what happened rather than really going on the ground. But then in the lead up to World War One, they sort of sent missions in Macedonia to see who these people are, what their thinking is, and they understood really well. The British have done research, the French and others, they know exactly who the Macedonians are and that they're distinct from everyone else.
Yeah.
And they shouldn't pretend that we don't exist. That just is a stain on their honesty as a civilization.
So, according to Arthur Evans, who was apparently a British spy or
Yeah.
operative, dropped in Macedonia,
Yeah.
Greek occupied Macedonia. He has an interpreter with him, and he asks the local, "So, what nationality are you?" The local said, "Macedonians, Macedonian." And the interpreter turns around and says to Arthur Evans, "It's Bulgarian." And he said, "No, I heard him say Macedonian." He said, "But what do he know? He's just a stupid peasant Bulgarian." So someone else has always been telling us what we are. I believe the only people who have the right to tell us who we are is us,
That's right.
regardless of who said what 3,000 years ago, 200 years ago. I really enjoyed today, folks.
I just want to sort of like before we finish, I think we also need to look at the wonderful work that the Indigenous community in Australia is doing in terms of truth and justice, right? Especially in Victoria, they managed to get a thing called the Unique Justice Commission, right? Which is all about truth telling and documenting the detrimental impact that colonialism has had on the Indigenous people, but also the success stories. The Aborigines weren't always victims, they fought back all the time.
Yep.
They stood up and they still are fighting and they still want a voice and they need to be respected for what they are and their achievements.
Okay, so history
For Macedonia.
is important
Yeah.
because history is what creates the present. And if you don't know what actually created it, you could end up believing in the propaganda. Now, we started this conversation earlier and we were speaking about helping our archaeology department, the section of it, Victor Lilchik Adamson's. I propose that we do something about it, and we will. Stay tuned. Thank you, folks. Anyone else want to say anything?
No, thank you, Jim.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Much appreciated.